welcome everyone to our 2020 Nurturing Nature Knowledge. This is our field station report meeting. This is a very different format than what we often do, and includes a whole different way of doing things in this COVID season. So I'm going to actually get started with a little bit of an introduction here. Here, Cedar Creek Institute is a nature center, science education center, a nature preserve, and an environmental field station. The Institute has 829 acres of very diverse ecosystems, including 9 miles of hiking trails. And best of all, these trails and the property is free, open to the public and free to visit from dawn to dusk. We are getting close to actually celebrating our 20-year anniversary of existence, and we're just really excited about all the different things that are happening out here. Our mission is to inspire the appreciation and stewardship of our environment. So we are located south of Hastings, about 10 miles, and about 45 minutes to an hour from the metropolitan areas of Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, and Lansing. The property itself is a beautiful property. We have about a mile of stream that includes, that is Cedar Creek. We have a couple of lakes that are on the property, and many other beautiful areas that are very inspiring for folks that are to come out and visit. So a little bit about what happened this summer. Obviously, things were a little bit different. We had to manage all the various aspects of doing work within a pandemic, but we were able to do a program. And if you signed in early, you got a chance to see some of the photos of our researchers doing work. Overall, we had 9 researchers working on 6 environment research grants. We had 3 Nature and Word Fellows, 2 Gordon R Fellowships, 2 Stevie Land Management Fellowships, a Ballow Water Resource Fellowship this summer, and 2 Watershed Management Plan Project Field Technicians. That's a total of 19 people that were funded through these various programs here at the Institute. What we are doing today is we are going to be talking or having presentations by our Stevie Land Management, Ballow Water Resource Fellowship, and Watershed Management Plan project folks. Next week will be our Nature and Words and Gordon Art Fellowship, and the week after that will be the presentations by our Environment Research grantees. Okay. So what we are doing today is I'm going to be showing a video that each of these groups have put together, and then we'll have a short period, about 5 minutes or so, of question and answers after each video, and we should be done in about an hour. Our first presentation is going to be by Sarah Grimes, who is our Ballow Aquatic Resources Fellowship, and so now I should be able to hit this, and we should be able to go.
Everyone, my name is Sarah Grimes, and I was the Ballow Aquatic Resources Fellow at Cedar Creek this summer. And in this presentation, I'm just going to give a brief overview of everything I learned and accomplished this summer. One of the major projects I was involved with over the course of the fellowship was the Cedar Creek Watershed Management Project. And through this, I was introduced to a variety of sites on Cedar Creek, as well as the 4 major lakes the project focused on, which was Wall Lake, Clear Lake, Big Cedar Lake, and Little Cedar Lake. And through this, through the Cedar Creek Watershed Management Project, I learned and utilized the P51 procedure, which is a method of analyzing habitat, substrate, and invertebrate populations of the streams sites in order to determine their health and biodiversity. And one of the things that I learned through this was how to identify invertebrates to the family level quickly and efficiently. And that whole process was just really valuable to me as I'm interested in stream ecology, and I was also introduced to just how different habitats and stream sites can be within the same watershed, which was really interesting. And another thing I did through the watershed project was I assisted with electrofishing, which is where you can shock the water and identify the fish species that are in the water and look at the biodiversity. So that was really interesting as well. It wasn't really an experience I was going to get anywhere outside of this fellowship, and it's definitely going to be valuable to me in my future. So these are just some pictures from the electrofishing. The top left fish is a black-sided darter. The bottom left fish is a white sucker fish, and then the one that I'm holding on the right is a bowfin fish. And these were all really interesting for me to see because they were all species that I haven't seen before. And it was just also really interesting to see the different level of sizes and types of fish that can all be in one of the same sites at the creek. So a few of the other things I did to help out with the watershed project was I performed lake monitoring on Wall Lake, and through this I used the YSI probe for water chemistry and the Secchi disc for water clarity. This was really interesting. The YSI probe is so convenient. In my first year of school, I did a lot of lab work for water chemistry, working in the lab to determine nutrient concentrations and dissolved oxygen. And the YSI probe can actually just do it in a matter of seconds. So that was definitely a really good experience to understand how to calibrate and use that tool because that will be extremely valuable to me in my future. Um, I also assisted with shoreline monitoring on Clear Lake. So we basically split the shoreline of the lake into segments, and then we canoed around the lake and took notes on what areas had natural shoreline or a seawall, and then also like high levels of vegetation in the water. So that was a good experience. Just getting exposed to how you kind of do monitoring of shorelines, and then what issues are, such as erosion within shores. And then I also assisted with the non-point source pollution survey, where we drove every single road in the watershed, and then when we saw sources that could potentially be non-point source pollution, such as livestock having access to the creek or to wetlands that drain into the stream, or we saw evidence of road runoff, we would mark that point with we would get the GPS point for that point so that later we can come back and do some more analysis on that non-point the potential for the non-point source pollution. Another one of the projects I assisted on this summer was the wild rice restoration project on Cedar Creek's property. So wild rice has a cultural significance to Native Americans and is also a staple for waterfowl. And the goal of the project was to establish wild rice populations on our own lake, Brewster Lake, and Cedar Creek. And this was done by seeding those locations in spring 2020. One of the things I did was I went out on the canoes with Corey on Arlen and Brewster Lakes and mapped the GPS locations of seeded rice populations, and then also put down notes such as the density of those growths and then invasive species that they may have had to compete with. And some pictures on the bottom middle is wild rice that was in the floating leaf stage. So the leaves are floating on the top of the surface of the lake. That was earlier this summer. And then on the right is, on the top right is the rice on our own lake, which as you can see has grown very tall and is in the flowering stage. And then also rice in the tanks on the bottom right, which is hopefully going to be transplanted later this summer, but that's also in the flowering stage. One of the skills I worked throughout the entire summer was plant identification. This started with the native plant sale in early June, where I helped collect over 80 orders of plants for the community, and through this I was able to learn a lot of native plants just by their seedlings, which is really valuable for prairie restoration because you can go into a prairie and see seedlings that don't have any flowers and identify if it's a native or a non-native plant. I also installed plugs at the Hastings Public Library and Prairie Restoration area across from the research lab and also by the driveway at Cedar Creek, and this just further exposed me to different native prairie plants because I was continuously around them and planting them and then IDing them in the field. And I also learned a lot of forest plants. I helped work on deer exclosure research, and we had to record all of the plants that were present in the exclosure and outside the exclosure in different transects. So yeah, plant identification was just definitely a really large part of this fellowship and is going to be very valuable in working in prairie restorations or any kind of natural resource management or just being outside and being able to identify what's native and non-native. Another aspect of the plant identification obviously was learning invasive species compared to native species. So throughout the summer I was introduced to a lot of invasive species such as autumn olive and multiflora rose, and then also aquatic invasive species such as narrowleaf cattail, Phragmites, and purple loosestrife. And one of the activities I did throughout the summer was treating regrowths of invasive species with herbicides. So from the prairie restoration area across from the research lab, the picture on the left is a healthy autumn olive plant that we treated with herbicide and then came back a week later to look at. And you can see the picture on the right is an autumn olive that has started to die due to the herbicide application. In addition to all the aquatics work I did this summer, I also learned some skills that are going to be valuable for land management. I learned how to fell, limb, and buck trees. Felling trees is when you cut one down, and then limbing and bucking trees is taking all the limbs off of a fallen tree and then cutting it up for firewood. So I learned how to use a chainsaw, which is a valuable skill for just like general life, land management, and stream restoration. And I also learned how to drive a tractor and with the brush hog on the back. So I helped brush hog Canada thistle in the prairies as well as fire breaks to be used for future prescribed burns. And then finally, the main project I volunteered on this summer was tracking spotted turtles with telemetry units with a GVSU grad student. And I helped do data collection and did paired locations while noting observations about the utilized and available habitat for the turtles. I had a lot of fun doing this. I really enjoyed being out in the fen and interacting with the wildlife, and also learning radio telemetry was really interesting, and I think that's going to be something useful for me in my future. So I'm really glad I got the experience to volunteer on this project. So over the course of this fellowship, I had many applicable, useful, and interesting experiences in aquatics, land management, and research. So the fellowship as a whole was extremely well-rounded and gave me a great number of different experiences. I also had the opportunity to learn about different habitats, and all of this fueled my interest in water resources, wildlife, and research. And then I was also exposed to a variety of field techniques and concepts, and I got to work on a large number of different projects in many different fields, such as the watershed, the wild rice restoration, learning aspects of land management and plant identification, and I really just gained a large number of different skills, both in land management and research, that are going to be extremely useful for me in my future. And then for acknowledgements, I would just like to thank Frank Ballo for providing the funding for the fellowship and just the opportunity altogether. It was an amazing experience. I'd like to thank Corey Lucas and Ricky Oldenkamp for just helping me out throughout the whole summer and working with me and teaching me all about prairies and water resources and everything I did this summer. And then also Cedar Creek Institute just for hosting the fellowship this summer.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Sarah, if you could actually unmute yourself. Thank you. A question for you. What was the most impactful experience that you had this summer?
I really enjoyed working on the Cedar Creek Watershed Management Project. For starters, it was really interesting for me to see like the biological side of watershed research compared to a lot of the chemistry and lab work I did for my project at school. And also like growing up like in the Berry County area, it was just kind of eye-opening to see everything that goes on and how like wide of a reach Cedar Creek is. Like my family has property on Wall Lake, so being able to actually go out on Wall Lake and study the water chemistry on that was just really interesting.
As a person who grew up on one of the lakes you were studying, did this project make you think differently about the place where you grew up? Okay, that's a question from Sarah Seiswerda.
Yeah, so I guess like growing up, like going to our property on Wall Lake was just kind of like this fun thing to do, and like we'd hang out, and that was that. But now like knowing about like all the different sources of pollution across the lake and like how it relates to the watershed as a whole, just like I kind of see it from more of a like scientific standpoint. Like towards the end of the summer this year, like after I had finished the fellowship, we were out there one day and I was just like talking with my dad about like everything that I saw around me. Like there were like invasive species on our shoreline, and there were like spots of like erosion where runoff was going into the lake, and I was like there's all these things that like need to be fixed. So yeah.
All right. Great. Well, thank you, Sarah, for sharing that. And
There's one more
oh,
question
is there? I missed
in
that.
the Q&A. If you
Okay,
don't mind.
Yeah. What advice would you give a student who is thinking about applying for next summer?
Oh, I would 100% recommend it. This has been like such a great experience for me. It affirmed my interests in like biology and research, and it gave me just such a great number of different experiences that I wouldn't get doing other internships or research somewhere else. So yeah, it was extremely well-rounded and informational, and it was a really great experience.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. We are going to move on to our next presentation. It is by Anna Wasilak and Grayson Kozak. Both of them were our field technicians that worked with the Cedar Creek Watershed Management Project. And their presentation will actually summarize some of the work that they've done as part of that watershed project. All right. Thank you for that video. Anna and Grayson, if you could unmute yourselves, and then we can have a few questions for you. And you're welcome to turn on your video if you would like as well. One of the questions that was posed is, did you find any rare or unusual fish, plants, invertebrates, or other creatures in the sampling?
Nothing too rare. I'd say the rarest thing we found were a couple of big bowfin.
Hmm.
All right. Anything, maybe not so much creatures. What are your, maybe if you can summarize your overall impressions of Cedar Creek and the lakes?
Overall, I thought it was a really beautiful, healthy system. Definitely a little warmer temperature-wise than I thought it was going to be. And that's just kind of due to a lot of sunlight and stuff. Not much canopy cover. But other than that, it was very healthy, had some nice fish numbers and some good biodiversity.
Yeah, it was cool to see how the temperature changed from the headwaters down to the almost at the Thornapple River because of all the groundwater that came in through the system. So the temperatures cooled down. So that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of connected to some of the questions we've been asking, what was the most surprising thing you found or most unique?
Let's see. Little Cedar Lake had quite a unique system. I don't think I've ever seen a lake like that before. It was incredibly clear and incredibly deep, and the dissolved oxygen levels were very high. So that was really cool to see.
I would agree. I was also really amazed by Little Cedar Lake. It was just a phenomenal system.
All right. Have there been any changes over time in things such as turbidity or insect populations?
It's tough to tell to look at an insect population as a snapshot. So we went out and sampled each site once. So this project is going to continue into 2021, and that would give us a better idea of what more of an annual change is going to look like.
Mm-hmm. And another question is, what are the most common species in the fish populations? I know that was part of your presentation, but if you don't mind reminding us.
Sure.
If
It
necessary,
was,
I can try to go find that point in the video.
I believe it was bluegill, creek chub, and what was the third?
Common shiner.
Yeah,
So
it was the
it's
common shiner.
mostly, yeah, a lot of small bluegill. So a lot of small, 2-3 inch bluegill. And then there is a good fair bit of size diversity in our creek chub population, anything from, minnow size up to 6-inch fish, and then a lot of common shiners. So those are, again, 2 to 6-inch fish sometimes.
All right. Maybe one last final question. And actually, I just a question just popped up. What was the biggest fish you saw?
The bowfin.
Yeah, definitely. We caught one big bowfin.
How
That
big
was
do you think he was, Grayson? You remember?
Gosh. Yeah, maybe 18 inches.
Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah.
All right. And I can answer this question if you don't want to, but what is left in this project? What work still needs to get done?
Like in terms of moving forward or of this year?
Well, maybe for you, and then I can add my own 2 cents for what we have to do yet.
Okay, so I am finishing up the raster calculations on GIS. So we have, looking at the lake shores, we broke it up into the 500-foot sections, and I've been working through creating each 500-foot section as its own raster. So it's just a lot of computer work, but what isn't these days? So.
Yep, we just have a little bit of lake data to process through too. We have to compile a lot of YSI data together, get some more accurate temperature and water chemistry measurements from that, as well as I'm working on some better fish community stuff.
And I know from the Institute's perspective, we have at least one water sampling to do on the creek, and hopefully get a couple of additional lake profiles done this season. We'll be working on a social survey over the winter time, as well as some agricultural surveys throughout the watershed. And then next summer, we will have a new team of student field technicians that will be working with us to collect much of the same data that we did this year, but it'll give us 2 years of field data, which will actually really strengthen the quality of the data. And so we'll be sharing this again next year, the results of what the summer is. And then ultimately, we will be putting together a watershed management plan. And our goal is to get that done by December of 2021, which sounds like a long ways away, but well, there's a lot of work that needs to get done yet between now and then. So that's just a little bit about the watershed management project. So thank you both to Anna and Grayson. We're going to get started after I answer one quick question, which is what is a social survey? And that is a survey we send out to all the residents or most of the residents within the watershed, asking them about their knowledge, their background, skills with protecting water quality, even if they their attitudes towards water quality. So we have a better idea of who lives here and what's important to them in regards to water quality. So I hope that answers your question, Fritz. All right, we are gonna move on just in a second to our final presentation.
Hi, I'm Zach Whitaker. And I'm Micah Meindersma, and we are the 2020 Pierce Cedar Creek Institute Stevie Land Management Fellows. I'm going to go over some of the goals that we had for this summer. So the main goal of this fellowship was education. So it was for us to gain experience in the field in everything pertaining to land management. So this includes anything from clearing trails to heavy equipment operation to data analytics and data collection, and pretty much anything in between. Land managers do a lot. And then a secondary goal of this fellowship was to really assist the preserve or the Institute in maintaining the property that they have here and creating also more ecosystem and diverse habitat. So some of the ways we accomplish this are going to be listed here in this presentation, so we can get started with that. First off is trail clearing. So this is a huge component of land management. Anywhere in the world, land managers are going to be tasked with ensuring that access to their property is well maintained, and that goes for us as well. So essential tasks that we do are going through trails and manually clearing brush, encroaching vegetation, anything that may be inhibiting access to the property or blocking the trails. This is really important because it allows both us, researchers, and visitors to the preserve access to the entire property, and ensures that there's no dangers or hazards throughout the property that are in the trails, at least. Second off is grounds maintenance. So there are many natural areas throughout the preserve, but there are also some areas that are maintained as mowed lawns or landscaped areas, and it's our job to make sure that those areas are maintained as well. So this allowed us this summer to learn techniques such as mowing and weed whipping, and just refresh those if we hadn't been kind of refreshing those earlier. So what's important about this is maintaining safety around the buildings and the lodging around the preserve. So we're maintaining not only an inviting and aesthetic area, but also a safe area free of dangerous critters that could approach up to buildings and pose a danger to people. Notably, this includes the eastern Massasauga rattlesnake, which most of the time will not be all that dangerous to people, but of course, as with any wild animal, if you startle it, if you make it feel in danger, it could possibly cause harm to you. So we try to maintain grass lengths below 6 inches across the mowed areas of the preserve in order to maintain the safety and then also a nice aesthetic around the buildings. Greenhouse work. Super important in land management as well, in terms of not only restoration efforts, but also as a source of income. So this year we did a plant sale, virtually of course, where we raised and propagated native plants to be able to sell to people who would like to start native plants in their gardens or native gardens at their homes. And then also, of course, native plant propagation throughout the preserve is vital in maintaining and restoring ecosystems. So we learned techniques such as seed stratification, scarification, and of course planting in flats and transferring those planted plants over to plug flats and eventually into the field itself. Restoration activities. So this is a super broad concept that covers a lot of different aspects. Restoration activities broadly kind of defines or concerns things such as actually planting native plants into an ecosystem, identifying what is growing in your ecosystem, and then also removing invasive species. So we did all three of these quite extensively this summer. First off, we need to know what's in our property. So native plant ID is crucial, and of course invasive ID is crucial as well to differentiate between those two. Invasive removal. So then after you've identified those plants, it is important to get rid of the plants that you do not want to see growing in your preserve. And then finally, planting, which is really what I think most people think of when they think of actual restoration activities. This is taking plants, native taxa, and actually planting them into the ground in the field in order to hopefully restore this ecosystem to somewhat of a native plantation and make it resemble its original state, what it would have looked like, hundreds of years ago here in the state of Michigan. Trail cameras. So another thing that we learned about this summer was the placement, maintenance, kind of all the concepts behind using trail cameras as a study tool. So trail cameras are super important to land managers in terms of doing population studies of certain animals that could be living in the preserve. So a lot of times they're used for things like deer surveys, for example, which we actually do here at Pure Cedar Creek Institute. For us, this summer, we were just learning the basics of installation of these cameras and then kind of concepts behind placing them and the considerations to be made when placing and using a trail camera. So here we got some images or some video from one of the cameras that we placed out in the sand prairie this year, but this is only a small slice of the wildlife that you'll find here at Pure Cedar Creek if you were to come and visit. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Zach, who will take you through the rest of the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Micah. So another really important thing we did this summer was chainsaw use and safety. So what we like to call it, we went through the Corey Lucas School of Chainsaw Safety, or maybe that's how he likes to call it. So we learned how to start and use these chainsaws safely and properly. So you can see here in these images that we are wearing our proper PPE, so our chainsaw chaps and our helmets and ear protection. And another really important thing we learned is how to sharpen the chainsaws. So that's something that we do here at Pierce in-house, so we don't have to send it off to a different company like Steel to actually sharpen those. So it's just a really useful skill that we now know and how to do. And we also learned how to maintain our saws, so just kind of take those apart and clear out dirt and debris from those saws, just to make sure they're just all working properly. So with those saws, we did bucking, limbing, and felling this summer. So one really cool thing I didn't think I was going to be able to do is fell a tree. So we felled like 30, 40-foot cherry trees and other trees. And it was a really awesome experience to go through. And so we went through from felling the tree, so getting the tree on the ground, to actually limbing the tree, so cleaning up the tree, and then bucking the tree to make firewood. So just kind of going through that whole process from start to finish. So then we also learned how to use some heavier machinery, or at least we think this is heavier machinery, using the tractor and skid steer. So we learned how to operate the tractor and skid steer. Mainly we learned how to operate the tractor because it's a good experience, but also here at Pierce we were trying to control patches of Canada thistle in the prairies, so we went in to make sure to mow those down before they got to seed and expanded those patches. And then we also wanted to expand burn breaks here. So some of the burn breaks are kind of getting grown over with overhanging trees, so we just expanded those just to make sure when we do a burn that the fire doesn't jump from the prairie to the trees. So just making everything safer. And then another really cool experience we got to do was using the skid steer. Specifically, we use the skid steer to pull up trees. So here, we're pulling up a walnut. But really cool experience to be able to actually get in that machinery and then use it to do something really cool, like pulling up these trees to make sure to clear up the prairie and open it back up. So then we also did some pesticide application. So we learned specifically how to mix herbicides. So here you can see in this picture we're just wearing proper PPE. So we're kind of going from we're actually taking the stock solution and then mixing that into our backpack sprayers, and then actually going to and apply those pesticides. So we learned that whole process. So while here at Pierce, we also studied for our pesticide applicators license. So hopefully we'll get that later on in the year. We still have to take the test just because the state of Michigan has just kind of closed that for now, but eventually we'll get to take that. Then and we applied herbicide solutions both as a foliar spray and cut stump treatment. So just kind of making sure we get these invasives out of the prairies and the forests, and making sure these woody species, the resprouts specifically, don't come back. So just making sure to do that cut and stump treatment with those. So then a really important and cool aspect we got to do this summer was prescribed burning. So we learned how to start and manage these burns. So for starting these burns, we learned like the perfect burn conditions. So making sure the wind speed's not too high, so you don't have a kind of an out of control fire. Also making sure you have enough wind to start the fire, and making sure you have proper humidity levels, and all these different aspects of how to properly start this fire and what conditions you actually need. And so specifically, we learned how to manage these fires safely. So we used backpack water sprayers and swatters to control the fire along the burn breaks. So just making sure these fires that were in the prairies weren't able to jump from the actual prairie burns across those burn breaks. So we made sure to put those fires out that were starting to encroach there. And then these burns are really important as a means to control woody species and invasive species. So a really cool thing we got to do this year, because Pierce wasn't able to burn in the spring due to COVID, was to actually do a growing season burn, which there's been some research showing that growing season burns are actually better for controlling invasives and woodies, because you're actually controlling them when they're growing, so knocking them back during that time. So that's kind of why we did this growing season burn as well as COVID. But it was really cool because we participated in the first ever growing season burn at Pierce. And so another really important thing we did this summer was helping researchers. So we got to kind of delve into that more research aspect of being at Pierce. So we helped with water quality monitoring. So looking at the quality of the water, and then what insects and aquatic invertebrates are actually calling that water home. And then we got to play with this really cute and hold this box turtle. So we helped this team moving turtle cages, but it was really awesome to see this little baby box turtle. And then we also did some spotted turtle tracking, so helping with that research project as well. So kind of what's next? So we're at the end of our fellowship. So we'll be getting to go out and do some duck banding. So that's not something we got to participate just because it's not that time yet. So later in the summer / early fall, we'll get to do some duck banding with both Corey and Ricky. So really, this is going to help us continue our stewardship hours and just gain more experience. And we'll also, with duck banding, and then prescribed burns as well. So being able to come out here and just get more experience burning. So with that, I just want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you to Pierce, Cedar Creek, and then really I want to say thanks to Ricky and Corey for making this such a great experience, and I think we both want to say thank you to you guys, just making this such a fun and rewarding experience and really helping us become more successful. And then again, thank you to PCCI and all the staff here just for making this a great experience. And then really we want to again thank Jack and Sue Stevie just for making this whole experience possible. So with that, thank you and goodbye.
All right, Zach and Micah, if you don't mind unmuting yourselves so we can actually hear you, and thank you for sharing your video. That's nice. A question for you: what do you think was the most useful skill and the most interesting thing you learned this summer?
I guess I can go first. Useful skills. I would say probably the chainsaw work. I think that was a skill that I really hadn't had a whole lot of exposure to before, and overall in land management, that's something that is used pretty much on a daily basis. I'd say in terms of most interesting, the prescribed burns were really fun. It was a good experience to kind of get into that that realm and area, just doing the burns and actually experiencing what it's like, because it gets pretty intense. So it was really nice to be able to get that experience and slap that on a resume and say, yeah, I can do this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've never thought I would fell a tree, so that was a very cool experience. I'm like, this is something I'll never get to do, but I did. So that was, I think, a really useful skill that a lot of people, just if you just graduate from college, you're not going to get that experience. Who's going to teach you how to fell a tree in college? What Corey did. So that's a really good experience. And also, just again, the prescribed fire. So again, something that you probably never gain in college. So having this fellowship set out like that is really great. So you get those experiences that you may not get otherwise.
A couple other questions. How do you remove invasive plant species, and what herbicides did you use?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to remove invasive plant species. Some of the most common ways that is done, and some of the ways that the methods that we were using this summer were just your basic weeding, right? Going through and pulling up these the weeds that you don't want in your garden or your planting by the roots, and storing them, in a bag, or getting them out of the planting so that they aren't causing any problems. That's going to be really effective with your more herbaceous species. Things like garlic mustard, things like mullein. These are herbaceous species that kind of like to go and root themselves into your plantings, but aren't necessarily like difficult to pull out. Some other methods, we would use mowing. So we get on the brush hog and mow down patches of say Canada thistle out in a prairie planting, or perhaps what's called a cut stump treatment. And so this is actually where we use herbicide to treat the stumps of different shrubs or trees that we cut. So this is kind of a spot treatment that will kill that stump where it is. In terms of herbicides that we use, probably the most common one would be glyphosate. So it's kind of like Roundup. It is Roundup. That would be the brand name. But essentially it's an herbicide that attacks the roots of plants. So it will be absorbed in through the leaves or through the stem and go down into the roots and will kill the plant where the roots are. We've got to be a little bit careful. It's not good to use in aquatic areas, not actually because the herbicide is toxic, but what's called the surfactant of the herbicide, which helps it stick to plants, can be harmful. So we try to use this in prairie plantings or areas that are away from aquatic ecosystems. And if we need to herbicide within aquatic ecosystems or near a stream or a lake, we will use different types of water-safe herbicides that do not include that surfactant.
The comment was they're both from Amy Cherry, and she said, "Wow, fabulous presentations. The research and land management interns and the skills they gain is what makes Pierce so fabulous." So just it's the change is very demonstrated in your presentations. Amy also had a question. What sort of job do you hope to get when finished with school? And do you feel that this experience relates to that?
I basically want a career in land management after I have finished a school. So if I could have Corey's job, that would be amazing. But doing something like becoming a land manager, land steward at a nature preserve or a governmental agency, like something like that as well. And the fellowship really did like confirm that I wanted to do that. So I kind of knew I want to go in this direction, but actually being out there this summer and doing all these activities really confirmed that, yes, I do want to go into this field.
As for me, I, for the most part, agree with Zach. I don't think I'm quite as narrowed in as exactly what I want to do, but this position definitely confirmed for me that the world of land management is certainly something that I would like to pursue at some point, or at least I've been enabled to pursue that going forward. As to where I end up or what I end up doing, that's a little up in the air still. Gotta finish up this year of school and then hopefully be earning some more education next year to set me up for positions later on in the future. But land management, certainly a passion of mine, certainly was a joy doing it this summer with Zach and Ricky and Corey. So very grateful for having this opportunity and being able to spend summer at PCCI.
All right. Thank you to both of you. Thank you to all of our participants for listening to all these presentations. And thank you to all of our students for coming in on a Friday and sharing some of your experiences with us. With that, we are done, and I hope to see you here at the Institute or in some other venue soon. Thank you.